Welcome to our community learning event. Over the course of 10 seasons, we've explored all sorts of incredible topics in the world of work. And today we're excited to continue with the second part of our leadership essentials today. Today we'll be focusing on mobilizing others. Now, before I get too much into the content of this session, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. One thing I want to remind everybody of is that we do record these sessions and they will be made available to you via email after it's all wrapped up today. We also will be sending you a feedback survey, so please go ahead and fill that out when you get the email to let us know about any content that you'd like for us to cover in the future, as well as let us know of any upcoming needs that you might have at your organization or individually. Additionally, just want to remind everybody to close out of any other apps that you might have open, shut off those phones for a little bit, and really spend the hour with us. We want you to engage with the learning for today's session as well as with your peers. Speaking of engaging with your peers, take a moment to hover over to the chat section of your Zoom application so you can change your setting from hosts and panelists to everyone. We want it so that you're able to communicate with one another. Now, having gone through all of those housekeeping items, I want to just take a moment to introduce our speakers for today. I'll start off with somebody who's no stranger to the show, an Aussie turned New Yorker who coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago. With a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many, many more, a warm welcome for our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. Hey, David, great to have you back.
Thanks, Evan. Good to be here.
And our special guest for today is a researcher at the Neuroleadership Institute, where she focuses on translating cognitive and social neuroscience into actionable solutions for organizations. She also helps to communicate relevant research in an accessible manner for the public. Previously, she served as the professor at Dominican College and New York University and as a researcher at the Nathan Klein Institute. She holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University and a PhD in neuroscience from New York University. A warm welcome to our head of scientific research, Dr. Emma Saro. Hi, Emma, and welcome.
Hi, thanks, Evan. Hey, David.
Hey, Emma. Great to have a conversation with you. Look forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just dive right in. We've been talking a bunch about leadership recently. Last week's episode was kind of the beginnings of what it takes to develop a leader. What are the important things for leaders to kind of manage their own cognitive capacity, regulate their own emotions, in the end, optimizing their focus, increasing their well-being. So I'd like maybe if you could just recap a bit for those that missed it and, talk about what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah, fantastic. And maybe anyone who was there at the last session, throw in the chat any kind of insights that you had, especially if you had sort of something that you learned that then like resonated during the week and kind of impacted your thinking, influenced you some way. So, folks, put in the chat if there's something you learned last week, if you were here, that kind of really resonated with you. But we divided leadership into 3 big ideas, 3 kind of pillars, right? And the first one is manage yourself. The second one is mobilize others, which is kind of about interacting one-to-one with others, right? And then the third one is drive results, which is more about interacting at a team level. But there's a bit of crossover for sure. But we went back and forward a lot because there's so much that you can say about others and teams. And we were like, do we really want to start with manage yourself? But you kind of have to, fundamentally, because the very act of managing anyone, whether it's just a project, right, or a small team or a whole company, right, we're kind of all managing and leading all the time. The very act of doing that puts your brain in a state of suboptimal performance, right? Fundamentally, because you've got suddenly more to think about than you've ever had before, more uncertainty than you've ever had before, more people watching you than you've ever had before, right? And so the result is you really need a lot of cognitive resources and a lot of insights. And both of those things are inhibited by the mental state that managing and leading, seems to bring about. So if you're not kind of intentional about getting your own brain into the right state, you don't have the resources you need for logical thinking and creative thinking, right? But more importantly than that, we talked about this a bit last week, as the project leader or manager or leader, whatever, your mental state becomes other people's or adds to other people's, right? So if you're like, anxious, your team's even more anxious than before they talk to you, right? It's like, imagine going into battle and your commander is really anxious. Everyone's like now freaked out, right? But if your commander is super calm, then everything's better. I know Patty just commented, yeah, your emotional state is additive to others. So we just decided, look, the first pillar of good leadership is really managing yourself. And we looked at the three areas as firstly kind of generally optimizing your brain, which is about understanding like that the general working memory, and then how do you get more of those insight experiences, but then how do you challenge those both of those kinds of outputs to make sure they're not just biased, right? So it's like logical thinking, creative thinking, and then testing your thinking, right? Sort of start there, and then all right, now let's manage emotions. Let's understand them, be able to label them, be able to manage them properly. And then how do we kind of sustain ourselves over time so we're always in that good mental state? So those were the kind of overall skills. We divided into 3 habits, and then ends up being 9 skills. And I think a lot of those foundations then come into the second pillar of, mobilize others. You now need those pillars, but you kind of use them in a different way. But a really, really important foundation.
Yeah. And Carmen said it best. I think that's kind of my insight from the whole thing, is put your oxygen mask on first before others. And it's true there, and it's true here as well. And just like David said, you need all of those resources before you can actually best manage and motivate your direct reports, which is kind of the next step, right? Is one of the biggest challenges of a leader, whether you're new or whether you're an experienced leader, is really how do you best motivate each individual person on your team? Because every person, as we know, has a different, primary motivator, like what best intrinsically motivates them. So if I were to ask you what the 3 main habits or things that you want to leverage to really best motivate your team, your employees individually, what would you say?
Yeah. So, this whole process, we've been thinking about this whole idea of, is there sort of a relatively consistent set of habits that most, leaders need in most organizations, most countries? Is there like a fundamental set of kind of brain-based habits that everyone should have? And it's spurred, so much fascinating debate about kind of what does that look like. And just for clarity, we're talking about like, let's anchor on a company of 10,000 people who has 1,000 managers and 100 top leaders and 10 C-suite, right? Just easy to think about it. Like 10,000 employees, 1,000 managers. We think that there's something that's relevant to at least 900 of those people, without adding anything, and then with adding a few things, all 1,000. Whereas the way most people think about leadership development is like, well, there's a frontline manager program, something else for middle managers, and we do something completely different for the top end. But what we find is you have no common language, no kind of positive social pressure, no panopticon effect. And it's really noisy, as you kind of grow. So we're, coming at this from a cognitive perspective, we believe there are a consistent set of habits and skills relevant to just about everyone in every organization. Now, if you're in a organization obsessed about cost cutting as your strategy, you might want to add some things. Or if you're in an organization that's massively innovative, you're an agency, creative agency, might be some things you add, but you still have this base. So anyway, long preamble, sorry. What we saw is that if, there's a real discipline to having to pick just 3 things. Yeah. But we said, if you're trying to mobilize others, there's 3 overall habits. And then we break this up. The first one is to actually connect really efficiently with people. So, like when two computers talk to each other, right? Computer A has a message, right? Maybe it's a PowerPoint with, 50 slides and all these animations, but it's essentially there's this data computer A has. It's trying to share it to computer B, by the internet, right? Computer A shares it, computer B gets it like 99.99% correctly, right? Like sometimes when animations are complex in a PowerPoint, it'll kind of go astray, but that's pretty rare. Like most of the time, exactly what you put in comes out the other side. That is not the case with humans, right? With humans, it's like we think, what do you think it is, Emma? What do people think it is, like in terms of efficiency?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's I think at its core, the human interactions is so complex. I mean, we almost never get it right? And you're bringing all of your own experiences when you're trying to understand somebody else. So all of that feeds into it, and you're going to walk away with a different understanding of what just happened.
Constantly. And fundamentally, it's because we have just such different schemas in the brain for just every word, right? You know, like if you're talking to your team in England and someone says that's bollocks, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the end of the world. They've just called me a liar and a thief and a cheat, and I have to quit. And if you're actually English, you'd be like, oh no, they're just being friendly, you know. So and that's an extreme example, but actually everyone has completely different schemas, like maps in the brain for every phrase and concept, right? And so you assume other people see what you see. So people think they're like 70, 80, 90%, you know, accurate in communicating. It's more like 50%. Yeah. And huge amounts of conversations go in circles, like, you know, I'm sure we've all had this experience of, you know, you find yourself repeating something like over and over, right? Yeah. Like conversations are super inefficient. So this first habit is sort of connecting efficiently, and we'll dig in, I guess, into the science in a minute. The second habit is like how you kind of motivate people individually and set them off in the right direction, right? Yeah. And then the third one is sort of how do you keep that going, right? So we sort of connect efficiently, set the right course, inspire great work, you know, continuously. It's kind of at a high level, we think those are the three most important cognitive skills, because we're the Neuro Leadership Institute. We think in terms of the cognitive skills overall. So yeah, that's you know, starting with connecting efficiently.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because as you were saying, I mean, it can be, you can make it really complicated, like all of the little things that you need for a leader to develop. But if you were to want to apply this for all organizations, as a leader, your primary goal is to interact effectively with the people that you're working with and that you're trying to drive performance. You can't do all of their work. So you have to make sure that the communication at its core is optimal, which can be difficult, but with like a very easy common language, you can get that across. How do you get them to reach their goals? You know, which is one of the things that can be really difficult when you're going from an individual contributor to one that actually has to set those goals. And then how do you have those conversations? I mean, conversations can be incredibly threatening, as we'll dive into. So some of them as a leader can be even more scary than the typical conversation. So yeah, having strategies for those is critical.
Yeah, a lot of the skills in this pillar, right, in Mobilize Others, are about having the right kind of conversation, like what we call a quality conversation, where your intent is the same as your impact, and all that. And we start, you know, this whole pillar starts with connect efficiently, and where we start with that is this whole thing about how open are the channels between the two of you, right? You got person A, person B. How open are the channels, particularly in person A, who's the leader, right, trying to communicate something, and how accurately are they perceiving person B, right? And so literally how much data are they perceiving and how accurately are they perceiving that data? And then for person B, how much are they feeling like the other person is actually an open channel so that they communicate more richly? And so there's this sense of like connection that's necessary for effective, efficient communication, right? Now, the foundation for that, we believe, is what we call a mindful moment, which is just simply an experience of like really being in the moment, actually with the person you're talking to, and noticing all the data you could notice, right? And excuse me, that's much easier when you activate what's called your direct experience network in the brain. I wrote about this in Your Brain at Work. And it's essentially kind of taking mindfulness, but making it much more secular and just understanding the mechanics of it in the brain, if I can use that word inappropriately. But so a mindful moment is essentially you're suddenly noticing, you know, sounds or words or images, and you're just really focusing your attention on the data in the present. And interesting, what it does is that turns down what's called the narrative network, right? The direct experience turns down the narrative network, which is involved in threat and basically noise and all this stuff. So without getting too lost in it, we start with that. So and you know, each of these skills are like 15 minutes. So you spend, you know, 15 minutes, but over a week. So people would imagine people spending a week like really practicing mindful moments. That's kind of the starting point.
Yeah, which can be difficult. So for someone that has now an additional set of tasks to pause and really focus on the moment, focus on one individual, now that you have, you know, 20 new individuals to manage, is difficult. And so it does take practice. And so this is why just this simple little strategy can be used to help just kind of build that sense of empathy and connection with someone.
Yeah, so that's where we start. Then there's this next skill is a really interesting one. It's actually something that we've taught to 25,000 coaches since like 1998, literally, when we started training coaches. It's a really fundamental skill that most people don't have. And the more you go up an organization, the more important this is. And we call it speak with intent. Mm-hmm. And essentially it's helping make sure that other people really understand what you're saying. The skill is ensure understanding. And it involves like simplifying your words, communicating like really consciously so people can picture what you're saying and really speaking for them. So there's a whole lot in there, but there's some fascinating research on kind of you having an image in your brain, them having the same image, and really aligning with that. And, it's a really powerful way of kind of explaining effective communication from a biological perspective. So that's the second skill. The third one is an interesting one. A lot of conversations you have with people are essentially someone has a problem, right? Like if everything's going well, people don't come to you. Or a lot of the conversations are helping people who are stuck at an impasse. Mm-hmm. And an impasse is essentially a problem someone has tried to solve and has failed, right? The classic schema there is you're on a crossword puzzle and you've got almost all the words, but there's 2 words you can't get and you just can't work it out, and your brain keeps working on it in the background. It's known as the Zeigarnik effect. And so these impasses are the stuff of conversations, not all conversations, but a lot of the important conversations you have, one-on-one with people are actually about places people are stuck. And one of the most effective ways and efficient ways to get them unstuck is help someone have their own insight. I kind of wrote a whole book on that called Quiet Leadership, about sort of how you bring other people to insight. Well, we've simplified all that into like, a 15-minute module of like how to bring others to insight powerfully, and sort of that shortest distance from A to B. Now, the fun thing is we're sort of giving people high level, but you can also dig in if you really want to kind of do that. But anyway, that's sort of the connect efficiently. We think there are 3 main things to do. It's like really open those channels, with open channels, now communicate in a way so people really see what you're saying. And then, in order to move other people, use questioning that really helps them have insights, because those insights motivate other people. So those we think are the 3 like most essential elements of kind of connecting efficiently.
Yeah. And just to kind of point out, we talk about insights kind of in the first like piece of leadership. So this is where you already understand how important insights are. You're driven by them. This is really tapping into your motivation, intrinsic motivation, and you want to motivate your direct reports. This is how you get them to insight. So the same thing happens in the brain. You're able to kind of pass that information on, which I think is pretty powerful.
Yeah, and so this is the thing. There's this like weave of ideas that keeps coming back through this whole like 3-pillar experience, right? So in the first pillar, you're learning about, for example, SCARF as it relates to you and your motivations, right? What are you most motivated by? Is it status? Is it certainty? Is it autonomy? Relatedness? Fairness? And then in this module, in this pillar, sorry, in the second habit, set the right course. The first foundation is to like personalize your interactions so that you're actually like interacting with people, taking into account SCARF, so how they see the world, and really motivating in a way that helps people, activate people's natural intrinsic motivations, right? So that's kind of the first thing. And then how do you then like set like great goals? There's a lot of people don't realize goal setting doesn't do much at all unless it's a stretch goal. Stretch goals do a lot. Like stretch goals have a better impact on performance than pay for performance, mm-hmm. In studies, for example. But so they're really effective and much cheaper than pay for performance. But you've got to know how to do them. And so we introduced the science of that and sort of how you get it just right, and the need to be able to picture them and the right amount of stretch, all of that. And then the third one is probably one of the most important skills in the whole experience of leadership. And that's, we call it delegate and let go. There's a sort of continuum of delegation, right? Some people I know someone who like always gives people nowhere near enough information and just kind of assumes they'll understand everything and then gets mad when it doesn't go the way they expected, right? And like that's like management by abdication. Mm-hmm. And you sort of and it fails, right? But the other end of the extreme will be people who micromanage, and giving people too much information, right? And they feel, overly controlled. So at one end of the continuum, you've got lots of autonomy, but no certainty, right? And the other end of the continuum, you've got lots of certainty, but no autonomy, right? And so we look at like effective delegation through the lens of SCARF, and it's like a moderate amount of certainty and a moderate amount of autonomy in the middle. And it's a really fascinating way to think about it, about sort of delegate and let go, which is something people really struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so in all of these, we're kind of bringing in our SCARF model, and we're applying different pillars of our SCARF model to, personalize those interactions to find the best amount of stretch for an individual. And the same thing goes for delegation. Is there like an individual nature to each of those? Like everyone has their own stretch goal that works best, probably.
Yeah, I mean, manage individually, motivate individually, definitely is a bit of a mantra. Like you've got to really treat people as individuals, and watch out for just kind of using heuristics and categorizing people as the same as others. But it's tricky, especially if you manage 20, 30 people, like to actually stop and activate the network in your brain for this person, right? Their history, right? Their motivations and their goals, which is a lot, right? You got the history, what motivates them and what their goals are. Like to actually stop and animate that network in your brain. If your brain's like animated like 100 other really complex ideas already, it's like a lot, right? And so we accidentally often just kind of cut and paste ideas, right, and end up being accidentally biased. It's really it can be really a lot. I was with a really fascinating experience last week. I was in Washington D.C. and I was invited to do a session that was kind of a bit of a career highlight. Was invited down to work with all the incoming judges joining the whole judicial system. I think it was about 50, 60, 70 of them. Wow. And from all across America, all sorts of different courts. But essentially they're being appointed to the bench as a judge officially, and they're there for some learning experience, right? And I was one of the people doing that learning, and it was fascinating. And I think what I loved most was the questions they asked, the really thoughtful questions that they asked. But it was so fascinating hearing the challenges that they have to just make sure that they're making really well thought out, robust decisions, because they're like case after case after case. Often they're really putting their brain under pressure, and they're dealing with really strong emotions, right, coming at them, and they've got to like stay super cool under pressure. And just a fascinating interaction with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because so decision making comes into all of this. So we talk a lot about SCARF, especially in this one habit and how you can apply SCARF, but best decision making and how to make the best decision towards what goal is the right, what stretch is the right for this individual, and deciding when to step in, and kind of help when you're delegating. Is this enough for this individual, or is it too much? Like, how do you make sure it's enough?
Just right. Now, if you understand SCARF, you'll see people having an autonomy reaction, like, oh, I'm being too directive, right? Or a status reaction, right? You'll see that happening as you understand it. And yeah, they found it fascinating. Actually, they found SCARF really helpful for thinking about like the jury and interacting with the jury, right? And trying to keep the jury's like threat state down by creating lots of clarity about the process and shared goals and all this stuff. So I had a lot of thoughts about keeping the jury in the ideal mental state, and even the defendants, just so that they can not be in an overwhelming threat state. They're going to be in a threat state, but how to bring them back to a manageable threat state. And I think anyone that you're managing, you sort of have this question: as I interact with you, how do I bring you to at worst a manageable threat state, which we call level 1 threat. We introduced that in the first pillar. But such an important skill. So the first habit is connect efficiently, which is a lot about kind of their brain connecting to your brain just the right way, and kind of helping people have insights, or at the very least helping people move forward, right? The second habit is really kind of setting people off on the right course, so motivating the right way, setting the right goals, then delegating just the right way. So sort of setting people off. And then the question becomes, how do you sort of keep people working well? How do you inspire great work kind of consistently, maintain great work, right? And that's tricky. And I was just reading a piece that came out today about, and I shared it with you this morning, about the level of anxiety, particularly in Gen Z, amazingly accelerated or escalated levels of anxiety in people who, joined the workforce during the pandemic and since. And how do you keep those people motivated, in this time? Really interesting. But the first one there, it's probably the most important habit that we've ever come across, and it builds trust, it builds psychological safety, it builds growth mindset, and it's around kind of getting this feedback culture going. It's a really interesting idea. So, long story short here, Microsoft asked us some years ago to kind of fix their feedback problem through cognitive science. They said, can you go away and research why, we've run 25 feedback programs. I made the number up, 25, but a lot of feedback programs, and people still say it's the biggest issue. We're not getting enough, all this stuff. And so we did this really long, intense, fascinating research project. And we basically found that the act of giving feedback reduces the cognitive resources necessary for processing feedback. Mm-hmm. And that we studied 35 different feedback models and looked at all the literature, and we couldn't find any strategy that seemed like it would work for giving feedback. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up saying that if you want to create a feedback culture, don't actually tell people to give feedback. Tell people to ask for feedback, right? And the reason that we shifted that is that we did a study in the lab, in a real lab with real people, and we found that giving feedback activates the threat response for the receiver. We knew that, but it activates a strong threat response. But it actually activates a threat response for the giver that's as strong or stronger, which was surprising. So, if you tell people to give feedback, both sides are really anxious. So it goes badly, right? But what we found is that when you get the receiver to ask for it, it roughly halves the stress level for both sides. And so it's much more fluent now. Now it's much more likely that people will actually process this. And so there was nothing else we found that we could conceptualize that really changed this. And nothing changed it. Yes, you can change it to Dr. Emma Sarah. Thanks, Mindy, for picking that up. It's the first time Emma's been on the show. I 100% agree.
No, it's not.
It's not, man. We missed it last time. Okay.
Yeah. That's so funny. Well, actually, one of the interesting things about that study, it's a great study, but one of the most interesting things for me is that we also took the feedback and looked at the kinds of feedback that we had. The feedback was more constructive when it was asked for first. So it's not only that you're reducing the anxiety level and the stress level for both parties, you're actually getting better feedback. I don't think it's counterintuitive, the whole process, but it also makes so much sense. As an individual, how often do you actually want to give someone feedback, especially if you have to give them feedback on how they should change the way they're doing things? That's scary.
It's super scary.
Yeah.
So here's a test question, and we didn't prepare for this. I didn't prime you. How many times a week, a month, or a day, do you receive feedback that actually is helpful and you end up doing something different? It could be small, medium, big, whatever. But how many times, a day, a week, or a month, do you receive helpful feedback?
Probably not as much as I should. And actually only when I ask for it.
Right.
That does take practice. And actually after starting to work here, I started to understand the importance of asking for feedback. I don't think I asked for it more than once or twice a year before.
But now what's the flow now? How often is it?
I try it much more often. So with the teams that I'm working on, I'm trying to build that habit. So maybe 3 to 4 times a week.
Right. That's still a lot, though. That's great. 3 or 4 times a week. So it's interesting. I've asked a few dozen of our team at different points randomly. And for everyone I've asked, it's quite a few times a week. Some people it's every day, but everyone it's a few times a week. And you compare that to sort of other cultures where it's never or very rare. Like the basic question, how many times a week do you get some information that actually is oh, I'm going to do that, and you do something differently, right? And it's much, much more in our culture. And the difference is just people ask for feedback. And so that one variable is super, super game changing. I just was running a retreat. We've started doing C-suite retreats a bit more. I was doing a 2-day retreat for a mid-sized tech firm, and we got everyone in this group, about 20 people. We got everyone actually practicing this quite a few times with each other. So we did about 4 rounds or 5 rounds or something. And in just literally the culture before we started this exercise and an hour and a half later after. Like, this was a completely different company.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Like, I remember just like walking back in the room afterwards, you could just see the visual cues between people and the sense of like togetherness and the sense of team. It was really, really different. So, if there was one habit that's the most game-changing habit, it's this one. It's asking for feedback. So this is in module 2. It's such an important one.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually we have a really good, and I was just thinking we should dive into this, is how can you ask for feedback? What's an example? Because there are better ways to ask. It's not just, can I just have feedback? I mean, that in and of itself is, doesn't have enough certainty to actually provide a reward, right? If we're looking to motivate people.
Yeah, it's funny. We did this study. It was about 5 or 6 years ago now. I was out kind of on the circuit talking about it, and I ran into someone about a year later, and they said, "Oh, this was wrong. This was a dumb idea. I tried asking for feedback. Nothing happened." I was like, "Oh, what did you say?" And she said, "I just went around and said, 'Can you give me some feedback?'" I'm like, "Well, yeah, you can't. That, like, if you just say, 'Can you give me some feedback?' People say, I don't know, like your shoes."
They go to the nice ones because it's threatening to provide feedback that's constructive.
Yeah, it's difficult. So there is a process. I'm not going to go right into detail, but we have it in a module called Improve, which is a 30-day experience you can run across your whole company. So we're still doing these amazing 30-day experiences individually or in pathways. And Improve is such a powerful one. But essentially you got to ask for what do I do well that I should keep doing? And what could I do differently in the future? And the more specific you are in the ask, the better. Like if I was asking for feedback from the session, it'd be like, give me feedback on the quality of the ideas, the quality of maybe my storytelling. Like the more specific you are, the easier it is for people to go, oh, okay, I can think about it. And then the really, really important variable is ask from quite a few people. You ask from one, you're like, huh. Ask from two, you're like, those are really different. You ask from three, it's like really different, but a bit of a theme. You ask for 4 or 5, you're like, oh, I see the theme now. And there's lots of these other interesting perspectives. I didn't realize people see this, right? Fascinating to ask the same feedback from 3 to 5 people. Really, really different experience.
Yeah. And I think at its core, why this whole habit, and we just touched on one piece of it, why this whole habit is so critical is because we are so influenced by our social interactions. I mean, so we consider what other people think of us. And we have a whole brain network that considers like our place in the world and how people see us and how we fit into it. And so just the idea of getting social feedback, I mean, we change our whole behaviors because, like for instance, one of my favorite examples is you see like $50 on the ground. And if people are watching you, you may pick it up and give it as a donation, but if no one's watching you, you're going to take it.
Right.
And so just that will change completely how you act. And so we care so much that having these conversations with our direct reports can be threatening just in and of itself to do it right.
Yeah, in fact, we're a little deep in this. Let's get to the other two. I know we're going to probably have a shorter session today with the time we're going. So, but let's get to the other two. So we're talking about like the overall pillar of like mobilizing others, right? We've said firstly you got to connect really efficiently. So what's in your head's in their head, and help people have insights. Secondly, you got to set the right course. So really personalizing how you interact with people, get them on the right goals, and then how you delegate and let go is so important. And then this third one is inspire great work, continuously. And, firstly, like get this feedback culture going, right? Make feedback the norm is the skill there. But then it's like, how do you maintain momentum? And this starts to look more like a conversation guide, like a way of interacting. And there's really three principles that underlie kind of the good leadership we think today in a world that needs more creativity, flexibility, people are stressed, or that one of them is psychological safety, right, which is essentially creating the space for everyone to actually speak up and share their ideas properly and challenge each other and all that, right? That's one. The second is growth mindset, which is everyone being in this learning mindset, not this like trying to look good mindset, right? And the third one's accountability, which is making sure everyone's really clear on what's expected and all this. And so those 3 elements, right? Growth mindset, psych safety, accountability, they start to show up in kind of these more structured interactions. And kind of what we'd call a check-in is a really important structured interaction. And most people check in by just kind of saying, hey, did you get that done? And then they talk about what went wrong, and that's that. But there's a really fantastic way of having this this check-in where you're integrating growth mindset. So you're focusing on what's being learned. You're doing it in a way that makes people really safe to speak up, but you're still actually focusing on accountability and all of that. And so that we sort of around halfway through these three pillars, we start to kind of weave more like conversations and what happens there. And so that's what maintaining momentum is about. It's having these conversations that basically help people have insights and move forward.
So what's the frequency of that? I mean, I think, here we have maybe like weekly or bi-weekly check-ins, should they be kind of like half like social checking in, just like personalizing and growing your relationships, or, like how do you kind of fill that check-in?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's sort of a template for how you have any, like might be a weekly conversation with someone, or it might be a monthly conversation with the whole team, but it's just kind of a template like for a way of interacting that maximizes the learning and the authenticity and the accountability. So it's sort of like, it's almost like a template for all your interactions with people when you're sort of checking in on what's happening, right? But you also might use this as a more formal, like quarterly check-in against their goals, that kind of thing. So it's a really important sort of set of guidelines for that. The final one, this is probably the one everyone freaks out about, but with all these earlier skills, this one actually becomes much easier. And it's basically how do you how do you kind of deal with poor performance when someone's not hitting targets, not hitting their goals, right? And this is an interesting one because you've got to sort of pull apart people who really maybe are in that 2 to 5% of employees who are just not a good fit, or not a good fit anymore, or for some reason there's not a values fit or something. So you certainly need that conversation. But if you're trying to help someone get better, right, and you are still investing in them, how do you have that conversation about the gaps? And how do you do that in a way that minimizes the inherently threatening nature, right, and helps that person have some kind of insight. So that's what we close off with. So connect efficiently and set the right course, and like keep inspiring great work. Those are the three sort of overall habits that are like the essentials that we think are relevant to pretty much everyone. So that's overall. Let's pause there. I mean, any comments you want to add, Emma? But also let's invite questions from the audience. Any questions that the audience have about kind of mobilizing others in any of the research that we've talked about? Maybe you can scroll through and see if anything's in there.
Yeah, they are asking a lot about the feedback. Feedback is a big thing. And I think also just the idea of having these difficult conversations, and what strikes me is the difficult conversations when you really want to continue investing in that individual, but you don't want them to be demotivated, in the midst of a lack of certainty within an organization. So a lot of organizations are going through ebbs and flows of success. And so how do you kind of maintain that momentum in your check-ins when there is a lot of uncertainty around them? How do you confirm that you're okay? We're still investing in you. We need you to, when maybe you've lost your teammates, to stay on and continue driving forward. That's difficult.
It's tricky. It's tricky. So we just last week kind of announced and started to show a really fun idea that we've had. So all these ideas I'm sharing with you around manage yourself, mobilize others, drive results. This is going to be some really powerful foundational learning for people, like 15 minutes a week, or more, or different formats or stuff. But one of the things that we've just released, or we haven't released it to the public yet, but we've started to show it, is essentially an AI coach that we're calling NILES, a Neuro Intelligent Leadership Enhancing System. So neuro-intelligent, so not just artificial intelligence, but neuro-intelligent. So it has a lot of artificial intelligence, but it also has all of our research and others about like how to interact in a brain-friendly way. So we've made an AI that's neuro-intelligent. We've been working on it for a while. So a neuro-intelligent leadership enhancing system, NILES. It's kind of a fun name. And the idea is you can actually ask NILES a simple question like, how do I give better feedback? But you can also have a whole conversation with NILES, like, hey, I've got this employee, they've been with me 10 years. They've been, doing really well for, a long time. They've just started to, not perform so well. We had this argument about X, Y, Z and blah, blah. And NILES will actually have a whole conversation with you that's spookily effective, guided by our research, and actually help guide you to your own insights, like coach you with our content as a background. So kind of sharing a whole lot of ideas that are super powerful. But the idea is people will be able to interact with Niles and kind of digest this. We're opening up the program for people to experience this in February, or it starts in February. We opened it last week. But the people will be able to kind of play with that and experience it from February coming up, and enjoy these ideas. Let's take a couple more minutes.
Yeah, I actually have a really good question in the chat, and this is something that we're diving into now, David, is the idea of accountability. So is there a best practice for creating it? And I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, we've been thinking deeply about this because we've trained coaches for 25 years, literally, right? Thanks for the kind words, Donna. So we've trained, so we know a lot about like getting people to commit to or to doing what they commit to, right? There are definitely some techniques that are super helpful. For example, when you're setting a task, like if you and I were working, Emma, and I was trying to get a task for you to do that I wanted to make sure you did, like, can you finish that report, right? By Friday. Like accountability means my expectations being much more explicit with you and me really making sure that you really understand them. So not, can you finish that report by Friday, but can you finish that report at least 2,000 words, by 5 o'clock Friday, at the level that you'd be ready to, send it into the journal, right? And is that clear? And are you, so a lot of it's the responsibility of the giver to actually be really, really thorough about what you have in your mind. And people tend to be nowhere near explicit enough. And there's a thing called the false consensus effect, where we assume other people understand us. So part of the skill of accountability is on the giver of like super robust thoughts. And there's sort of two sort of variables. Like, is this action, the action I'm giving this person, is it actually going to happen? Like, as I imagine them doing it, like thinking ahead, is it going to happen? But also, is it going to be helpful? Like, is this something that they should be doing? Like, if I picture this person completing this action, will it actually help me and help them? Like, is it the right kind of step they should be taking? So you're sort of mentalizing, which is a difficult task. You're mentalizing like the whole task. So that's a big piece of accountability. And then the other piece of it is around expectations. And this is sort of more on the receiver side. Is around expectations. Like, if I'm the manager and I give you this task, if you meet my expectations and deliver this as I planned, I get like about a +1 on a sort of on a 0 to 10 scale and a 0 to -10 scale, right? So I get about a +1 on a 10-point scale if you just do what you said you're going to do, right? If you do what you said you're going to do, but do it even better than I expected, I get about a +3 or 4, right? So pretty strong. But if you do it even a tiny bit not what I expected, like even a tiny bit, right, I might get a -5, right, in terms of a threat response. And what happens is those start to then, like if I get that once, then I'll then be primed. Are you going to do that again? Right. And I'll be more negative about you and I'll be primed. Expectations. So it's about, so a big piece of accountability is like making sure that you actually at least meet expectations or exceed them, or you start this downward spiral. So there's a whole lot of fascinating neuroscience that we dig into but we'll save that for next week. We're doing, it's a bit of a preview on kind of what we're digging into next week.
Yeah, no, I know. And I really want to dive into it. But one more thing that Ruth kind of mentioned was this idea of the word accountability. So we're starting to talk about accountability a little bit different because we want people to be in kind of a reward state to dive into accountability.
Yeah. We're thinking about the right word for it. Maybe it's just expectations, managing expectations or something. But fascinating. Look, I think I might jump off. You want to take some more questions? I've got to jump off and literally catch a plane. But take some more questions for sure. But I'll just close off with, we've been talking about the second pillar of 3, manage yourself, mobilize others today, drive results we'll be doing next week. And all of this is in this 6-month solution we're calling LEAD, which is a completely digital asynchronous solution, but with amazing things you can dive into and in a cohort. So it's social. And for the first time, we've opened this up to the public. So you'll actually be able to register. We just opened it last week. I think Evan just put a link in. I don't know if that link works or not. But we'll put some links in so you can kind of check it out online. I think a video has just gone up. And so you can personally experience this. And then obviously we're talking to organizations about it as well. If you're from an organization, just put the word lead in the chat and we'll make sure someone reaches out and chats with you, kind of, gives you a bit of a demo and walks through it. So if you're from an organization and you're not already talking to us, or even if you are, just put the word lead in, and someone will follow up with you. So yeah, Emma, I'll jump off, let you kind of take some final questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for the great conversation today. You were fantastic. Let's get doctor before your name next time.
Next time. Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Great to see you, and
Yeah,
happy Friday to you and everyone else. Thanks
Yeah,
so much.
happy Friday.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for Dr. Rock being here. Yes, we got to make sure that we have doctor in front of your name.
Okay.
Folks, yes, we'll keep the line open for a little bit longer to take any questions if you'd like to share them. Otherwise, I'm happy to direct you to some additional resources. As a reminder, we will be sending out the recording of today's session as well as follow-up resources, including articles, podcasts, and of course, more information about our new program, LEAD. Fantastic. Thanks so much, folks. If there are no further questions, then I'll just run through our final announcements for the day. So one of the things is, if you enjoyed today's session, you will love our podcast. You can find it on pretty much any streaming platform that you prefer. You can also learn more about the Neuroleadership Institute podcast at neuroleadership.com/podcast. We will be back next week to complete this trilogy. Next week, for Leadership Essentials, we will be covering the science of driving results. So for those of you who had lots of questions about accountability or meeting expectations, you'll be able to learn so much more about that here. We also offer a complimentary season pass so that you can pre-book any sessions upcoming for your brain at work. We do have a product demo for December 19th. It's going to be taking place from noon Eastern time. That will be linked to you in the chat in just a moment here. You'll have a first-hand look at what we have to offer to you in our leadership program that's LEAD, the Neuroscience of Effective Management. Finally, we are holding a number of events around the world. And of course, here in the United States, we will be holding a leadership development mini summit both in Texas and in San Francisco in February of this year. If you're interested, please go ahead and send an inquiry to me. You can find me at evanmcfalls@neuroleadership.com, and I'll type that in the chat. With all of that said, we look forward to connecting with you again next week. The next session of your Brain at Work Live will take place on Friday, December 22nd at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so much for being here with us, Neuroleadership community, and I hope to connect with you again soon. Take care.